The alarm woke me before my own thoughts did. Red light spilled across the ceiling of my new home, on a planet that was not mine, and I already knew, in that first breath, that peace was not as settled as the papers claimed. My name is Alia Venn, and 6 months ago, I signed my name beside a human named Daniel Ashcroft to end a war that had drained both our worlds for 9 long years. I was a daughter of the Veil Compact, a people who had crossed the stars long before humans had learned to build wings for the sky. Yet it was humanity who forced my empire to its knees, and it was humanity's peace terms that brought me here, to a quiet house on the edge of a farming town, married to a man I barely knew. That night, the alarm was not a drill. Daniel was already awake beside me, already moving, pulling on his boots with a calm that made my hands shake harder than the sound of the siren did. I asked him what was happening. He said only one word, steady and low: intruders. I had grown up believing my people understood strength better than any species in the galaxy. We had fleets older than human civilization itself. We had committees, protocols, endless layers of command that decided every action before it was taken. So when Daniel opened a drawer beside our bed and pulled out nothing more than a simple flashlight and a radio, I could not understand why he looked so unafraid. He told me to stay low and follow him, and something about the steadiness in his voice made my fear quieter, even if it did not disappear. We moved through the dark hallway of his family home, a house built by his grandfather with wood and stone instead of steel and glass. Every step he took seemed to already know where the walls were, where the doors led, where the shadows could hide a person. I later learned that every child raised in that house had walked this same path in the dark, over and over, until their feet remembered it without needing their eyes. Outside, lights swept across the fields. 3 unfamiliar shapes moved near the old grain barn, careful and quiet, clearly searching for something. My heart pressed against my ribs. I recognized the shape of their armor before Daniel did. They were Veil, my own people, sent by a faction that hated the peace treaty more than they feared another war. I opened my mouth to explain who they were, but the front door of the house was already opening. Daniel's mother, a small woman named Grace Ashcroft, stepped onto the porch first, her voice calm and clear across the dark yard, asking the intruders to identify themselves before anyone came closer. There was no shouting from our side, no panic. Just a steady sense that everyone in this house already knew what to do, because they had talked about it long before tonight, long before I ever arrived. A neighbor named Oliver Hale appeared from the tree line behind the house, moving quickly but without a sound, closing the distance between the barn and the porch. Another neighbor, a young woman named Lily Turner, was already on the radio, calling for others nearby. I realized, with a strange chill, that this town had prepared for nights like this long before I ever stepped foot on their soil. The intruders hesitated when they saw how quickly the house had responded. On my homeworld, hesitation from an enemy meant they doubted their strength. Here, I understood later, it meant something else entirely. They had expected fear. They had expected confusion. Instead, they found calm, coordinated resistance from ordinary people who refused to be surprised twice by the same kind of danger. Daniel stepped forward into the yard, his voice carrying across the open field, asking the intruders to lower whatever they carried and explain their reason for trespassing on private land. He did not raise a weapon. He did not need to. Around him, without a single order given aloud, neighbors had already spread into positions that surrounded the barn from every side, cutting off any quiet retreat. I stood frozen on the porch steps, watching my own people falter in front of a species we had once called simple. The lead intruder finally spoke, demanding that I be handed over, calling me a traitor to the compact for marrying outside our kind. His voice cracked with anger, the kind of anger that comes from losing something and refusing to accept the loss. Daniel answered him plainly. He said I was not property to be handed over, and no matter what title or blood the man carried, this land and everyone standing on it would protect what belonged to them. For a long moment, nobody moved. The night held its breath. Then the intruder lowered his weapon first. It was not because he was outnumbered, though he was. It was because he understood, standing there in a stranger's field, that these people were not going to be shaken loose by fear. Grace walked calmly down the porch steps and told the three men that there was coffee inside if they wanted to talk instead of fight, and something about the simple, unshaken kindness of that offer seemed to unsettle them more than any weapon could have. They left before sunrise, escorted quietly by Oliver and two others down the old dirt road, and no blood was spilled that night. I later learned this was not luck. It was the direct result of a community that had spent generations learning how to stand together the moment trouble arrived, without waiting for permission or instruction from anyone above them. Sitting at the kitchen table afterward, wrapped in a blanket Grace had given me, I finally asked Daniel the question that had followed me since the day I arrived on his world. I asked him how an entire species, without ancient fleets, without endless layers of command, without our long history of war, had managed to stop an empire far older than themselves. He thought about it for a while before answering, turning his cup slowly between his hands. He said that humans were never taught to wait for someone else to act first. From the earliest years of childhood, they were raised to notice trouble, to step toward it instead of away from it, and to trust the people beside them enough to move together without needing to be told. It was not about weapons or fleets, he said. It was about a kind of readiness that lived quietly in every person, waiting for the moment it was needed, and vanishing again the second the danger passed. I thought about my own people then, our careful committees, our endless approvals, our belief that strength came from size and history rather than trust and readiness. I understood, sitting in that warm kitchen with the sun rising outside the window, why our fleets had faltered against a species so much younger than our own. It was not because humans loved conflict, it was the opposite. It was because they loved their homes, their neighbors, their small quiet lives, enough to defend them instantly, without hesitation, without needing permission from a throne or a council seated light years away. In the weeks that followed, I watched the town slowly return to its usual rhythm. Children walked to school past the very field where strangers had once stood in the dark. Farmers returned to their fields as if nothing unusual had happened at all, yet beneath that calm surface, I understood now, there remained the same quiet readiness that had saved us that night, resting patiently, waiting only to be called upon again, if it was ever needed. My own people sent no formal apology for the attack, though whispers of the failed mission spread quickly enough through diplomatic channels. The Compact's leadership, once so certain of their own superiority, grew quieter after that night, more cautious in their dealings with the humans they had once dismissed as young and unrefined. I began to understand, slowly and completely, why no empire in the known stars dared to challenge humanity a second time. It was not their weapons that made them dangerous. It was not their ships or their strategies. It was the simple, unshakable truth that every human, from the oldest grandmother to the youngest child, carried within them a quiet promise to protect what they loved, and that promise did not bend to fear, exhaustion, or the size of the enemy standing before them. Months later, standing in that same kitchen with Daniel beside me, I finally felt something I had not expected to feel when I first arrived on this world. I felt safe, not because of walls or weapons, but because of the quiet, steady people surrounding me, who had shown me that true strength was never loud. I married a human to end a war I did not understand. I stayed, because that night in the dark field finally taught me why we could never win it.